So I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, the housing market in macroeconomics. I think it's just kind of interesting, the sort of political nature of how things play out with it. In the sense that, the Federal Reserve, as far as I know, and I'm a armchair theorist in sort of understanding, monetary policy and all that kind of stuff. It's been, I took some in terms of understanding of what it is and how it all works, but I wouldn't say that I'm a particular expert in it. There's far better people than me. But I just find it interesting in how much control the Federal Reserve has over the economy in terms of what's going on with it. I was a little skeptical, but given what we've seen in the last few years in terms of what they are able to do of driving up the amount of cash that's in the economy and creating just like craziness in terms of how free-flowing the cash was and how everybody thought that they were rich. And then, in the last month or two where it's been easing the amount of cash that's in the economy, how much it's like driven the pattern of, whether it's the stock markets or all the sort of cryptocurrencies or even just people's sort of fears and anxieties and all those kind of things. It's just very interesting. And what I find very interesting is, even though they're supposed to be independent, right? Like, I don't think the previous president understood that. But in general, they're supposed to operate very independent from any of the sort of presidential office, as far as I know. Maybe they do have discussions behind closed doors, but I don't think that that's the way it's supposed to work out. They're supposed to be pretty independent. But, what's interesting is how much that the president gets blamed for economic actions that are occurring in the economy that are fairly independent of what they do. Now, they had a number of spending bills in the last little bit that have gone through that actually at the time were pretty good policy, but I think, like, in terms of implementation, they just take so long to implement these things that they're almost out of sync of when they should be implemented. So then they're, somewhat overspending in what's happening. So I think that there has been good in general, everybody, in terms of keeping the economy from imploding in and of itself during a pandemic, which is quite possible. And very likely at the time. I think they did everything that they needed to do, right? Like they sort of smoothed the economy. But here's the thing: what happened? I'm very I really strongly think that this has happened. But how do we know this? I don't know. I think all of the central banks across most of the world overestimated the severity of the economic impact of the pandemic. We were expecting a ton more deaths, even more than what we have, and a lot of economic impact. But what ended up happening was the economic impact maybe wasn't as severe, at least in the short term. And so what ended up happening is that we had way too much money in the economy. And it was because of honestly, I think it was the coordinated effort, which were kind of not coordinated, but kind of coordinated across the world, that drove this sort of exuberance that's happening, irrational exuberance that's happening right now, or that has happened. I think it's slowing down at this moment. where people just thought there was free money everywhere and it's going nuts. And now, as we're pulling back, and the economy is slowing down somewhat to a more reasonable pace, people are freaking out over it, obviously, because it's not growing like it was, right? But then they tend to blame the politicians, which operate fairly independently from what is going on in the central banks and what's happening in the economy. So I just find that interesting, and how we default to something that's observable, and there's this like underlying force that, the economists are very well aware of this, from what I understand, and they understand all this kind of stuff happens, but the rest of the world does not understand all of this stuff happens, does not understand that there is a weak link between the sort of political powers and what's happening in the central banks, and it was designed that way. Even though that that there might be some discussions and stuff behind closed doors, I'm pretty sure that they're supposed to operate fairly independently, and the reason is that they're supposed to be counterbalancing forces, where they that if one of them overreacts and the other one is sort of there, just like I forget what they call it, I can't remember what they call it in terms of the political speak, but it's just to smooth everything out in case there's like one that's crazy. You want to like have somebody else that's like calming it down in another way, right? And it's that independent that is actually supposed to be making it function pretty well. And to be honest, during the pandemic, I actually think that was the only saving force. That was that was operating in a smooth and sort of rational fashion. Yeah, so I just find it absolutely interesting that this happens when that they are independent forces, that there is a, the political discussion really in sort of the common discussion about, the inflations being caused by, the presidential office and presidential actions and the downward stuff in the economy is being blamed on it. I just find it ridiculous. And it's just painful to listen to any of this kind of stuff, because it's so, from what I understand, it's so detached from what is actually going on, and it's just political speak. And, it always plays out, from what I understand. This is like a common theme, in that there is little, like, the sort of misattribution of what is actually going on is super common with all of this stuff, and you just have to, like, simply shake your head and just be like, all right, that's weird that happens, and then you just gotta, like, go on your day at the end of the day. So I think, it's just a commentary. I think the sort of what's going on right now is that there's a lot of political speak by certain groups that are, blaming the president for all the things that are going on in the economy, and it's absolutely false. That there is very little cause and effect there, from what I understand, but maybe I am, missing something, but I doubt it, that there's just very little cause and effect, and you really have to think about what is truly going on and what's going on. I think, honestly, in my personal view, while there is So the actions of the presidential office is more of a calming effect, or somebody that is sort of talking about, smoothing over a lot of sort of things, if it's done well. And they should be fairly invisible if it's done well, and people are not sort of, the presidential actions are not in the news every day, and it should be just like, okay, whatever. And I think that's in general what we're aiming for, and people forget about this, and I've talked about this before, is across the board to get organizations to work well and economies to work well. It's not about, creating this sort of crazy drive and booming sort of thing. That's not what it's about. It's a calming action, right? Organizations function well when things are calm and really certain, and then we can make decisions from there. It's a heck of a lot easier if things are calm and we know what's going on. So I think we need to be very well aware of that calming actions, consistency, that's what drives growth. That boringness is what drives repeated growth. It's nothing else. And the more uncertain, the more sort of crazy things get, the less that people are willing to buy and do things. Because it's just like, okay, let's say you have two siblings, right? One is pretty calm and just pretty level-headed, and the other one is, just a firecracker, right? Like, you talk to them, one day everything's fine, the next day it's just like exploding all the time, and you're like, I don't know what I did. So you naturally gravitate towards the calm sibling that is gonna just calm you down. And it's like any circumstance, it's always going to be like this, right? You're going to navigate towards a sort of calm person that sort of calms things down if you're to do a deal or do any sort of business or anything like that. Now, if you want to have a lot of fun and all that kind of stuff, maybe the firecrackers a hoot. But generally, you want that consistency. And then they're going to be the ones that people are going to be like, well, that person's level-headed. We should go with that person. So just remember that consistency, it's the way to do it. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.